Remind people where you were on 9/11 and what your earliest memory is of that day.
Well, I was in Washington. I'd been in New York the day before, but I'd gone back because the Senate was going to be in session. And I had left my house on the way to a Senate meeting that morning when I got the news about the first plane. Nobody knew what to make of it. I'm on the phone desperately trying to figure out what people knew. I got to the Senate, and by the time I got there, the Senate was being evacuated, Senate buildings, the Capitol itself. So I gathered up my senior staff, and we were just looking at each other with such total pain and confusion. And we then, of course, learned about the second plane. We learned about what was happening in New York. Got to a TV as quickly as possible to begin monitoring it. It was just a sickening experience, Chris. And I went the next day. Chuck Schumer and I, we were one of the very few planes in the sky that day, the 12th. And we landed at LaGuardia. We were on a FEMA plane. And we took a helicopter and we went over, circled the burning pile. And when we landed, we met up with the governor and the mayor and went walking toward Ground Zero. And as we moved further south, and we saw this curtain of black smoke that was stretched across the island, basically. Occasionally it would be broken by a firefighter coming out. I remember one image so indelibly, dragging his axe. And it was as close to a depiction of hell that I've ever personally seen. There's a lot that I remember from those early days and from all the days after, because as an elected official, I felt such a responsibility to reach out and help everyone who had been affected by this terrible attack. There weren't that many survivors. The ones who did survive were grievously injured. The loss of life was overwhelming. I went, like so many others, to the Armory and the piers, looking to see what was happening, how people were reacting. But it was also, my job and the job of other elected officials to get our city and our state and our country what we needed. So I went back that night, and Chuck and I had been at a big meeting with all the local, state, federal officials. When we got word, just shockingly, that the White House had sent up a request for $20 billion because, of course, the Pentagon had been hit. We were going to have to immediately start hardening our security, and there wasn't one penny for New York. And Chuck was trying to find his family. He hadn't seen his wife and children. I got the last train out of Penn Station and got to Washington in the early morning and went immediately home, changed, showered, got to the Senate, where I began talking with my colleagues about what I had seen and what we were going to need in order to rebuild. And it was a moment of great national unity and resolution. The late senator from West Virginia was my first stop. He had just taken back the Appropriations Committee, and I told him, Senator, I need your help. It's been a terrible 24 hours actually seeing on a large scale what we could only see on our TVs. He said, what do you need? And I said, well, we need $20 billion for New York too. And he said, well, consider me the third senator from New York. And then later that day, Chuck and I went with the 2 senators from Virginia to the White House. And it was just the 4 of us, plus President Bush and his top officials. And we were describing what we had seen. This was the day before he himself went. And President Bush said, "What do you need?" And we said, "We need $20 billion. He said, "You've got it." And he meant it. And there were a lot of efforts to undo that pledge, starting almost immediately. But we were able to count on him, and it meant a lot to help the families, the victims, the downtown, everything that needed to be rebuilt and give people hope again. It did become very personal for me. I saw so many problems that others weren't yet aware of because I was listening and watching. And one of the things was what was happening to, the people in the neighborhoods, and particularly the people working on the pile, because it was clear they were being affected by this toxic brew of what had been bombed by the planes and was in the air. And unfortunately, the administration kept saying, "No, there's no evidence of that." Well, you could see the evidence, you could smell it, you could taste the evidence. So I became very passionate about helping everyone whose own health was going to be damaged because they had put themselves out to help. And when I met the families of the injured, profoundly burned, in comas, induced comas for months, the whole bottom half of a young woman's body pulverized by being hit with some piece from the plane, recently engaged, looking forward to somehow figuring out how she could walk at her wedding.
Her fiance refusing to leave, her begging him not to marry her, to move on with his life, and him refusing to leave.
When I went to visit her the first time in the hospital, she was at the old St. Vincent's Hospital originally. She was so profoundly injured. Beautiful face, long hair, managed even through all the pain to display a kind of whimsical, humorous personality. And she desperately wanted to go on with her life, but she feared that she couldn't. Well, I did everything I could to help her because I keep thinking, what are we here for? And it's not just what are we here if you're in public service, what are we here on this earth for? What is the purpose? And I just feel so strongly, in part it is to, do whatever we can with whatever skills and resources we have to help others. And the need was so great and so present in every place we went. People hunting for their relatives. I was working hard to set up the Victims' Compensation Fund and worked closely with Ken Feinberg. And sometimes, Chris, I'd have to send one of my staffers to go knock on a widow's door. Because she still, after 6 months, could not get out of bed. And I would meet these shattered lives of people where they were broken, but I saw so many of them strengthen and show such resilience. So I felt privileged. Whatever I could do was an honor, but it gave me an insight into the human spirit, and I like to think the spirit of New York and America, that I wish every American could understand, because it's what makes us who we are and how lucky, blessed we are to face terrible tragedies, but to recover, to move forward, to keep thinking about the future.
So let's talk about the future. If you take on the responsibility as Commander-in-Chief, President of the United States, your responsibility will be able to deal with that threat that is enduring and perhaps greater than ever before. Do you think that the next president needs to level with the American people that words like destroy and defeat ISIS that your opponent loves to use all the time about how quickly it will happen, that it's not the reality, that the reality is this is generational. The reality is there is no quick win against ISIS, that this is going to be a very, very long time. Do you think it's time the American people are told that?
I think it is time for a candid, honest conversation about what we face, because it's not just ISIS. I actually think that intensifying our efforts against ISIS could lead to their defeat. By that I mean depriving them of territory, including their headquarters city, Raqqa in Syria, taking back the cities they seized in Iraq. But that's not the end of the struggle. The struggle is against a violent ideology, a form of violent jihadism that is very much propagated over the internet, which is attractive, unfortunately, to young men and some young women across the world who are looking for some meaning in their lives and find it in this call to violence and evil. But there's something about this struggle that really demands more than governments, and that is we have to protect our country by working with one another, and that most certainly includes the American Muslim community. What unfortunately Donald Trump has done is made our job harder and given a lot of aid and comfort to ISIS operatives, even ISIS officials, who want to create this as some kind of clash of civilization, a religious war. It's not, and we can't let it become that.
But it sounds like strength when he says it, and people, when they're afraid, like and need the idea of a strong leader. What do you say to the supporters of him who resonate with that message?
Well, there's phony strength and there's real strength. And it's phony strength to not know what you're talking about and to make outrageous statements that will actually make our job harder, no matter how in the moment it sounds. Real strength is leveling with the American people and making it clear we will defeat ISIS. I do believe that, but that we've got to make sure that here at home we're not opening doors to people who feel that somehow they want to be part of this global movement because Donald Trump has said it's a war between us and them. And that's pretty attractive to people. And we're finding more and more as we look at the profiles of some of the folks who get radicalized and recruited, that there is an element of mental illness in some. There's an element of just total alienation. We don't have the depth of problems that you see in Europe because we've done a much better job of assimilating people from everywhere. We are a nation of immigrants, and we should be proud of that. It's a great asset. So we can't let Trump or anybody of his ilk undermine one of our greatest strengths. So real strength will come here at home in making sure we work with law enforcement and with schools and with community organizations to help people identify anyone who is being recruited, to try to intervene early, to have the best intelligence, an intelligence surge that will better prepare us to protect ourselves. That's the hard work that is required. That's the work that the people I was meeting with today from Republican and Democratic administrations know we have to do. And it's not the loose talk and the bombastic commentary that's going to defeat this enemy. It's the millions of decisions by strong, patriotic Americans and our allies around the world.
So you have ISIS, North Korea, and Russia. They will all be on the desk in front of the next president of the United States as emergent situations, urgent situations. Let's talk quickly about each one. ISIS, you've said focus on Baghdadi. And you've also said recently, we will not put troops on the ground in Iraq or in Syria to take and hold land. Tell us why, because there is a counter theory that you took out bin Laden, it didn't change al-Qaeda. You take out Baghdadi, you're not really dealing with the head of a snake, you're dealing with a worm that grows in other directions. And Syria, as you well know, Secretary, is the heart of the problem. Why not flip it and not worry about the leader of the organization as much as the home of the problem and get on the ground and make it safe for the people there?
We have to do both. Let me just quickly respond. I do not think putting American ground troops in Syria to hold territory, to become occupiers, to try to govern people is at all the right strategy. I support special forces, I support enablers, I support trainers. I want to intensify our air campaign. I don't think it is regularized enough. I want to do everything we can on intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, support our Arab and Kurdish allies, keep working with the Iraqi army so that they can take back Mosul, and then we've got to figure out what the day after strategy is. What do we do, and how do we support a more effective governing structure inside Iraq? So I feel very, very committed to depriving ISIS of their so-called caliphate. That's a huge symbolic recruitment message that we should pull from them. I also believe that Baghdadi is a central figure in the promulgation of this ideology. And it really helped our efforts to organize against bin Laden. Now, it's true that Al-Qaeda is not dead, but they are nothing like they were. It's also true that we collected an enormous amount of intelligence in the raid on bin Laden's home. So we've had some big advantages by using as an organizing principle going after the leader that I think would also work to our benefit with Baghdadi.
North Korea.
Yeah.
There is now word that not only was this a test, but it could be a sign that they could have a warhead, a small one, in a shorter time frame that had been recently expected. We remember with Syria the line in the sand that the president drew. When you look at North Korea, if you were president of the United States, what would be your line in the sand? That if this supposed madman in North Korea gets a weapon, that if he crosses this line, it's no longer just about sanctions.
Oh, I absolutely believe that it has to be made very clear. We will not allow North Korea to have a deliverable nuclear weapon, and we will approach this from a number of perspectives. I've had conversations in the past with the Chinese about North Korea. Up until relatively recently, I think they were under the impression that they could control their neighbor, and they didn't want to crack down because they saw it as a useful card to play. He gets a little crazy, maybe the South Koreans will, move toward them a little bit. He gets a little crazier, maybe they can make some deals with the Japanese about some things they want. It was a strategic calculation. It's not that way anymore. The current leader is unpredictable for both the Chinese and the rest of us. The current leader is clearly intent upon ignoring pressure, advice of any sort coming from anywhere else. And so we've got to make it clear missile defense is going in as quickly and broadly as possible. Our message to the North Koreans and everyone else listening, they will not be permitted to acquire a nuclear weapon that has a deliverable capacity on a ballistic missile. And we've got to start intensifying our discussions with the Chinese because they can't possibly want this big problem on their doorstep.
When they say to you, what does that mean? They won't be allowed to have one.
Well, we're not going to go into all the details. I mean, obviously, that's not something that I have the right to do or the responsibility at this moment to do. But that will be the policy of my administration because I don't think we're going to make progress. I mean, adding additional sanctions and doing it the way that we did, that I led with Iran, did have a big impact because they worked. The Chinese have been awfully leaky. The regime lives off of luxury goods and the kind of benefits that they then can use to, reward their loyal followers. We've never been able to fully cut that off. And so we will do more on sanctions because that's part of an overall strategy. But that's not enough.
Lastly, Russia. In the news recently, since the attempt at a reset, Russia has never been more rogue and openly oppositional than they are right now. Your opponent has taken the approach of trying to cotton to Putin. He says he's a strong leader, stronger than the President of the United States. The reason he says he does this is because where has being confrontational gotten us with Russia? What do you make of his strategy about sweet talking Putin as a way of opening a channel of communication?
Well, I think his ignorance about Russia and Putin are dangerous. In an interview, he didn't even know that Putin had invaded and occupied Crimea. So this is just more of his loose talk, his kind of reckless pontificating that really doesn't have any substance to it. I think that if there are ways to do business with Russia, we should always be open to it. That's what the reset accomplished. When Putin came back, he came back, I think, with the view that his highest goal had to be to prevent what he considers to be his neighborhood in Eastern Central Europe all the way to Central Asia from falling under European Union and American influence. And he has tried to disrupt and interfere with democratic elections, as he has, even in our country, attempted to do with this round of elections. So he's pretty transparent that he's looking for ways of elevating Russia and himself. What I most worry about with Trump is that he is conveying several impressions to people around the world that are quite damaging. With respect to Russia and Putin, this romance with Putin, with dictators, he's praised Saddam Hussein, for example, as well, sends a message that maybe the United States no longer really stands for human rights, for freedom, for human dignity, stands against aggressive behaviors. That's a terrible message because that just further encourages leaders who are like Putin, wanting to, do their own version of oppressing their people and reaching out beyond their borders. Secondly, his very dangerous talk about Muslims, both American Muslims and international Muslims, makes our job against ISIS, makes our job against terrorism much harder. And we already know he's done damage. We already know from experienced intelligence and counterterrorism experts that leaders within ISIS are rooting for his victory. Now you combine a free pass for Putin on aggressive behavior and a welcome by ISIS that his language plays right into their hands and will give them more credibility in saying that this is some kind of civilizational war. We're going to have to undo the damage that he's already done in the campaign after this election and make it very clear the United States stands by our word, we stand by our friends and allies, we're willing to work with anybody, including, of course, Putin. I've had many conversations with Putin, but we're not going to do it by just rolling over and adopting his wish list, which is exactly what Donald Trump has done.
Secretary Clinton, 9/11 is a day that America has a heavy heart. I appreciate you spending the time with us and reminding people why we have to never forget.
You're absolutely right. And Chris, I'll be down there again at the memorial to pay my respects and to talk with some of the people that I met in those terrible days right after the attack.
For them, it'll never be over.
It can't be. And it shouldn't be for us either.